Okay, welcome everybody to the November 2021 imaging meeting. And tonight we'll have Naveen Malik. Did I get that right? Or Malik?
Malik.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I
No
should
worries.
know you more than a year and I don't even know how to pronounce your name. Okay, so anyway, yeah, so he's going to go over his experiences with broadband imaging, and that's basically just full color imaging and going from afocal all the way to up where he is now. And after this, we'll talk about some announcements that are coming up, specifically Astronomy Days, and how we're going to do a quarterly imaging challenge. So, but anyway, let's get off with Naveen first. Malik, sorry. Trials and
I'll answer to all
tribulations.
sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay. Take it away, Naveen.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, trials and tribulations. I just wanted to talk through my experiences with broadband imaging. I've faced problems, I've addressed them, done stuff with Dobsonians untracked, commandeered my wife's DSLR for a while, built my own tracker. I've gone through now to monochrome imaging, which is, it's been an interesting journey. And I just want to give a shout out to two tools, my pen and paper, without which this presentation wouldn't exist. I just throw it out there. And if you haven't considered it when you're doing stuff, like I take notes, there's no way I can remember all the things I've tried over time. And it's been great to go back and reference those. The quick aside before we get into everything, like there was my flats for the new monochrome camera. I was using Nina to test the exposure time. Like 5 minutes later, I couldn't remember what the numbers were, but I had written it down, so that was good. So starting off, untracked Dobsonian. So last year, my kids got a 8-inch Orion XT8 and took it outside. And this is the first picture I took, or maybe not exactly the first, but the best of the first, taken through this telescope, looking at the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in early December. If you got to see it through anything, you probably know that like it was mind blowing. Like it blew me away. Like it could see the separation of the rings from Saturn, which doesn't really show in this picture at all. It was a lot crisper with the naked eye, but it's what got me hooked. And I took my camera on my phone, held it up to the eyepiece, and of course bumped it. So I'm like, okay, how can I hold this thing just right at the right distance to get focus, not bump anything? But that's where I started. So because of that, holding the camera is like, well, this isn't the best way to do it. So I found a nice universal model for a phone holder. You could see here, you put the eyepiece on the inside, you clamp down, and then when you look on the other side, you clamp your phone onto that. And it printed out really nice. Once I got it cleaned up, all the bits that moved should move. But it was pretty fiddly to take pictures with. And this isn't the best I took. This is just one that illustrated like just the fact of getting the phone aligned with the center of the eyepiece and then making sure it didn't show the bits of the case itself was frustrating. So I have a 3D printer. I went off and decided to build my own. On the left, there's just basically a 2-inch eyepiece, where it's a holder for a 1 1/4-inch eyepiece that fits into the 2-inch eyepiece slot on the telescope. And then the blue bit fit on top of that. And there were 3 screws that would hold down the camera, which was, I pulled out calipers, did measurements, and modeled this so that the camera was in the center of the eyepiece, no matter what eyepiece I picked.
Naveen, just curious, what you have there in the middle, you said you have centering. Are those like at 120 degrees of each other?
Yeah, they are.
Okay, all right. So yeah, it's basically a clamp, an even clamp. That's nice because you can adjust it if you're stars or whatever look weird. So,
Yeah,
okay.
you have a little bit of play for some, lateral or horizontal movement, as well as a little bit of play for tilt. It was a reasonably tight fit between the two pieces, but not completely, because it's really hard to get printing tolerances that good, and also I wouldn't have had flexibility. But then I managed to get cooler pictures than blurry stars with this setup, and this is really what got me into the hobby. This was just amazing, and I look at this picture and I still smile, because this coming from somebody who never really looked through a telescope and was finally seeing the deep sky objects. Thankfully, Orion was up, nice bright object, very easy to find, and it was great fun. I'm sure my family was very tired of seeing pictures after a bit. But I hit limitations, of course. I learned a lot. Exposure time, very limited when you're not tracked. It's stunning how fast at 1200 millimeters the object is moving across the frame, because you're not compensating with the Dobsoni, at least, for the rotation of the Earth. Learned about focusing, so nothing really too negative there. I printed a Botnov mask to stick on the end of it. I have a reasonably large print bed. I've seen models where people have cut them into pieces to print, or you can buy them online. And I started playing with calibration frames, especially flats, still using the phone camera, though I did dabble with the DSLR with this as well. But because of that, I started down the path of designing an equatorial platform, doing a lot of math, doing a lot of modeling, printing out little scale models to just see, like, it's mechanically going to work the way I thought it would work, not trusting my own math. Thankfully, that slowed me down, so I didn't actually build it, because I realized it wasn't going to meet the goals that I had. I wouldn't be able to guide, so things would drift. I'd have to reset the platform pretty frequently. I didn't do the math on exactly how long, but probably every hour or something like that. Pretty heavy device. Not that the mount I have now isn't heavy, but and then polar alignment's going to be pretty difficult. So I wanted to have better tracking. I wanted to try a shorter focal length to learn about stuff. I didn't know anything about gear, so I didn't want to go out and buy something without having at least some knowledge. So I started looking at homemade options that weren't a giant platform. And I decided to go with my wife's DSLR. She wasn't using it, so I kind of commandeered it with her permission. And here's an example of just a 30-second frame on a tripod for Orion. It's in the middle. You can't see the purpley bluish blur. Just to illustrate, like, how quickly things move. But I went and got some 2x4s in my garage, some threaded rods, did a little bit of math to figure out how far away the crank arm here needs to be from the hinge, which is just a really simple, like, $1 hinge I got at the hardware store, and plopped a camera mount on another rod. And I've had questions like, what was this blue thing for? It's because I had another threaded rod here trying out putting the camera on the top, which it constrained how much I could move the camera around. So I drilled another hole and moved stuff around. But I didn't want to ding the camera on that, or it was a rough end of a bolt cut with a hacksaw. I didn't want to cut myself either. But this was fun because the crank arm, you get the radius of this setup so that the crank arm is 1 rotation per minute. And I don't have a picture of it with the watch, but I had a watch with a second hand here. So I literally stood there cranking it by hand, staring at this watch hand, trying to pay attention and keep it on track. It was, for a prototype and just trying this out, a resounding success. So this is 150 second exposure, single exposure. but as I mentioned, like it's hard to consistently crank it. This was early February or maybe late January. It was cold. Not used to holding my arm up that high for so long. And it's just like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm human. I bump the tripod all the time. You can see little stars and elongated in all sorts of different directions. So, but it told me I was on the right track. So I went in full in. I mentioned I showed some other prints. I have a 3D printer. I do 3D modeling. This is right up my alley with geometric shapes. I don't do anything artistic 3D modeling. And I went and designed a curved rod barn door tracker, upgraded the hinge to some bearings that were compressed into the body of the tracker, printed gearing. I've got a small stepper motor. It's all driven by a Raspberry Pi Pico, wrote the MicroPython for it. And I had a lot of fun with this. I spent gobs of time on it, but I was able to get stuff that blew me away. This was a total of just shy of 40 minutes taken at the, is it the Harris Lake boat ramp, whatever's in the southwest of Sharon Harris. But very limited in the number or the exposure time. It still didn't track as well as something you might purchase or engineer with in better tolerances. I look back now and I didn't notice this then, but chromatic aberration, so the colors don't line up quite right. And you see the flaring of like blue offset from the peak of the stars. Polar alignment was a red dot finder on the hinge, so it's pretty rough. I could go longer than what I'd estimated with the equatorial platform, but I had to reset the rod every couple of hours, which exasperates the hard to find objects. It was easy to find Orion, Nebula, Horsehead. It's got big bright stars, and I know the constellation well. One night I tried to find the Rosette Nebula, which has got the heart cluster in the center. And I think it took me an hour of fiddling around. I ended up taking the Dobsonian out, setting it up next to my tripod with the camera and using that to find it because I could see easily because the camera viewfinder and everything is just, it was rough. And then I'd take a short exposure because I'm in Bortle 6 skies. Take a short exposure with the camera. Is that it? Nope. Okay, move. Is that it? Nope. Move. So that was fun. It was fun. I mean, actually, I managed to get an image of that. I don't have it in the presentation, but it's out on my Astrobin. So I knew at the end of this I was hooked. So my reluctance to commit to gear was waning. So I decided to go ahead and pull the trigger on that. I'd learned a lot about calibration frames. I was taking darks, flats, biases. So that was good to learn. Learned about the importance of the polar alignment and accurate tracking and the fact that I would really love something with GoTo because it was really rough to find some objects. So I got a quote, real tracker. I still call my barn door tracker a real tracker. I mean, it tracks. It's just not as good as what I ended up buying. I got an EQ6R Pro and a William Optics Zenithstar 73. So the aperture is 73 millimeters and the focal length of 430 millimeters makes it an f5.9. I continue to use my wife's DSLR. Didn't have a guide camera, did get a finder scope, just slapped a 40 millimeter eyepiece on it. And first light was able to get some time on Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, M45, and was not able to get any more time on it until late September. It set behind some trees and then had a spat of clouds, and I just could never get back to it. But I learned a lot from that and the stuff I imaged with this setup. But one of the things I'd missed was when buying them out, it's good to know if you've got a lemon, basically. And so the best way to do that is to put a camera on there that can take fast enough exposures that you don't turn off, you turn off the guiding, and you gather the logs for it and do some analysis. So I didn't have anything other than the DSLR. So I found ASCOM drivers for that, which I used for some other stuff. Worked fine for PhD 2. Realized though a little bit later, it was taking 16 seconds to download each and every frame, which is not that great when your guiding is typically in the order of a couple of seconds between exposures. So I fast-tracked getting a guide camera. I'd planned to wait, but went ahead and got the ASI 290mm Mini, which you can see sitting up here, swapped out the eyepiece. I've gotten some other hardware at this point, which I'm happy to talk about, but after the presentation. And I was able to verify that the mount was fine. The periodic error was under 0.15 arc seconds, so that was good. Just a shout out to the imaging group here in RAC. Like I spent a lot of time in emails back and forth with folks, and everybody's very helpful. So I really appreciated the help there, and I hope that anybody who needs help with anything imaging will feel comfortable doing that as well. Because definitely like to help people be successful in their hobby. So what I learned with this setup, longer exposures are better. So reducing noise, which I'll get into a little bit more later. I also learned that exposing too long will expose any kind of guiding problems that you have. Learning about ISOs on cameras was really important at this time too, because I could do longer exposures. The ISO or gain for an Astro camera became important. And learning that the exposure times are part of the factor in how long you can or should or is optimal to expose is also specific to your sky. So take that into account. With the ISO and gain, you reduce noise by increasing those, but you also reduce your dynamic range. So there's a balance to be had there, which was a somewhat painful lesson to learn. I spent time taking exposures and only to learn that I did it wrong, but that's okay. And just one mention, like I couldn't take the exposures anywhere close to the recommendations that were given to me by the various software tools I use. But it was okay. You know, you do what you can, and it just means you have more noise and deal with it in post-processing. So don't let that be a deterrent. On the software for recommendations, SharpCap has a sensor analysis, which I didn't realize till putting this presentation together is actually free. So whatever camera you have, as long as you can get it to show up in SharpCap, you could do analysis on it and find out for your actual sensor, not some theoretical thing that people done math on or done testing on other cameras, where you can tell for your sensor the optimal settings might be. I use Nina for my image capturing, and it can import the SharpCap analysis to do optimal exposure calculations as well, which is pretty convenient. So after all that, I ventured into cooled imaging. I got the ASI 533 MC Pro, which you can see hanging out here, red in the back of the scope. And it is a great little camera. So I'd say little because the sensor is pretty small, but there's no amp glow. It's cooled. It's a workhorse, and really had some good successes with this guy. This is the Iris Nebula. Spent a lot of time on this. I had a very clear week, sometime in late spring, early summer. I can't remember now. I just sat on this for as long as I possibly could because the moon was down. Got about 19 hours. I've also done some narrowband imaging with it, because you compare it with things like the L Extreme filter. There's other brands out there. This is the Veil, or Eastern Veil Nebula. I think it was about 4 hours total. So I knew I wanted to go to monochrome imaging, though. I decided to go with the one-shot color because I felt I wanted to ease into it. What surprised me is I wanted to go past that faster than I ever thought I would have, but because I was noticing some things that weren't deal breakers for using that camera, but for whatever, maybe it's the way I was set up, but I was seeing some debayering artifacts. The sensor, as I mentioned, was pretty small in that specific camera. I really liked the results with narrowband imaging, but with one-shot color, it's pretty inefficient. And I didn't have a filter for sulfur 2, which I could have gotten one, but then you get into the inefficiencies. So with the one-shot color cameras, you've got the Bayer matrix, which is typically a 1 red, 2 green, and 1 blue pixel in a 2x2 array. So HA, or hydrogen alpha, and sulfur 2 are going to be using the red pixel only, or coming through only the red pixels. So you're using 25% of your sensor. I put it on the slide. I think I was also just looking for an excuse to go down this route. So I took the plunge, got the camera in September, the ASI 2600 Pro. Also added the ZWO 7-position electronic filter wheel with 7 filters. So I did luminance, RGB, and then narrowband, HA, hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and oxygen 3. In this setup, just to point out, I've moved from the guide scope to an off-axis guider. So this is kind of sandwiched in there ahead of the filter, so that it's not being restricted by the light coming through the filter. And I haven't managed to quote finish a whole lot of images yet, but these are a couple that I'm calling done. An upgrade on my Pleiades, managed to get, I think this one is close to 19 hours with the monochrome camera in RGB, roughly even between each of the color filters. And then Orion on the right, and as we're talking broadband filters in this talk, but so it has some broadband. It's about an hour and a half total of color with the RGB, but then about 4 hours of hydrogen alpha for the wispy, dusty looking stuff, which was really, really cool to process. So just into like cameras and what I've learned or observed over my time of doing various things is, their purpose is to capture signal from a target object, whether it's an apple on the table or deep sky object. The challenge is when we're talking about deep sky objects, we get a lot of noise that gets disguised as data. So our goal is to try and improve the signal to noise ratio in our imaging. And what's really important for what I do is I want to understand what are my goals, what are my priorities? And a lot of times they're kind of in the moment. So I showed earlier this picture of Orion Nebula I took with the Dobsonian. Like, I nailed my goals with that picture. I was having a great time making progress, learning about all sorts of stuff. Fast forward to now, and like I'm pretty happy with this picture too. Different goals, but it's an evolution, not necessarily in the equipment, but in what you know about the hobby and what you can do. I've gone back and for example, reprocess things like the 45 minutes or so of Pleiades I got with my telescope the first night that I had it. I think I've reprocessed that thing at least 24 times, and every time made improvements. There's a lot to learn, not only about the capture, but also about the processing. And for me, my goals right now are to, I want my stars to be pretty tight, minimize the trailing. So this is a zoomed in of the two prior pictures on a couple of stars. You can see the evidence of having no tracking with the Dobsonian on the left, even with very short exposures, which I'm not sure how long that exposure was, but it was really short to the time spent with the better camera and the tracking and all that other setup. Also, the left, I wasn't doing any kind of integration, no image stacking. That was to come later. So another goal I have is I want generally easier processing. So, swamping noise and collecting enough data, though I will certainly process something the moment I have anything, because I want to see what I've gotten. But it's hard being pretty new to this hobby, but I'm trying to take the time to collect enough data to get really good contrast in the images and less noise. I also want good star color. Not always a priority, but it's pretty interesting in some, especially the color images, to see the stars are so varied in the hues that they emit. It's can be really mesmerizing. And then from a practical perspective, I don't want to take up too much space on the computer hard drive. Only have so much, and these things, if you keep keeping all the raw data, adds up really, really fast. I often set night-specific goals as well. This week, I think it was Tuesday night, I was trying to figure out if I could do better with my field flattener adjustments. So played around with that for about half an hour and decided, nope, I don't know what I'm doing, or it's good enough. Probably both. So some thoughts on, happy imaging. The first thing I start with is like constraints. I've got trees to the east and west, like in my neighbor's yards. So they block. I think if something were to rise out the top of the tree, I'd probably have to wait till 50 degrees or 55 degrees altitude. I'd have to look at my spreadsheets for that stuff. To the northwest of me, I've got Holly Springs, which is a pretty bright light bubble, which as something's setting into that region of the sky, notice a definite increase in the background noise. I have a reasonable amount of tilt and rotation issues with my focuser. Just have to live with it unless I want to, do some upgrades. Family and work, I need sleep. So that one's pretty important. From a processing perspective, I've had problems with processing some, mosaics. I can do like a 2x1 or 3x1, but anytime I get into I tried a 2x2 of Soul Nebula and Heart Nebula, and it was, I threw it away. It was pretty bad. So something I need to work on. Either maybe it was the capturing of the data. I don't know. As I mentioned, my field flattener, I'm trying to fiddle with that. And I don't have a way to transport my telescope, so a case would be good. But I thought tonight, if the forecasts were right, the moon might be visible at like 4 a.m. I'm like, well, there's that tree in the way, so I'm not going to see it from my backyard. Should I go out to the lake? And what do I put my scope in? I don't have a means to transport it, so that kind of limits what I can do. So earlier, I'm talking about the camera and its purpose, and goal being improving the signal to noise ratio. I just wanted to run through a little bit of that, which I hinted at in some of the earlier comments, I think. But one of the things is you look at your gain or your ISO if you have a DSLR. The higher the value of either of these, the less noise you're going to see on when you're capturing images, but also the lower your dynamic range. So the less contrast you can capture in an image. There's sites for this, like Photons to Photos is a really good site for looking up the popular DSLRs and their characteristics. As I mentioned earlier, SharpCap is free for the sensor analysis, so that can work for you as well, probably. The manufacturer's website's also going to have a bunch of information about the sensor characteristics. So for my monochrome camera, I run usually at a gain of 100 based on this and the sensor analysis. So noise, so there's read noise and I heard the term dark noise. I don't know if that's really what it's called, but when you're using any sensor, any camera, the sensor generates noise, which is, there's not like each pixel has a bucket to say, hey, this is the noise and this is the real data. It's all signal from the pixel on your sensor's perspective. Read noise is the noise generated when you're reading the data out of the sensor. And then the dark noise is the data, or the noise generated as you're exposing. So slowly as you expose, there's noise generated just by the act of using the sensor. So when you hear people say swamp the noise, or you're trying to expose long enough where the signal that you're receiving is more significant, or significant relative to the noise that was generated. Mention again SharpCap and Nina for figuring out what this should be. When I was shooting with the DSLR, I think it was telling me that my optimal exposure was something ridiculous, like 1100 seconds, which I could not do. So I ended up, I think, shooting at like 1 or 2 minutes and just being very happy with that. Once I didn't remember after a while that was the recommended exposure time. I started looking through my notes for this presentation. So, and then there's, yeah, I alluded to, there's always constraints to work with in reality. So I had a restate my goals, good stars, swamping noise, minimize star saturation, and not too much storage consumed by imaging. So with the new monochrome camera, the ideal gain is 100 based on the manufacturer and my sensor analysis. So I took it out. I set it at gain of 100. Nina said I should do an exposure of 14 seconds. I'd been doing 120 seconds, so I completely ignored Nina and went with 120 seconds. And this is a very close crop of the saturated pixels on some stars in my shot of Pleiades. Total number of pixels isn't a whole lot out of a 24 megapixel camera, I think. Having 2000 pixels saturated, not a big deal. But I wanted to see if I could bring that down. So that's a fun project, a fun thing to try and figure out. Is that possible? And with the 120 second subs, taking an hour of data is like 1.5 gigs. So that's not bad, but that might change. So I went with the recommended exposure from Nina after that, and yeah, cut the saturated pixels down to 20% of what it had been. So yay. But in that same hour period, it's 240 pictures and 12 gigs. So a significant increase. So we're now into the point of I got to balance my goals. I don't want to use 12 gigs of disk for an hour of data. So we talked earlier about gains. The higher the ISO or gain, the lower the noise, but also the lower the dynamic range. So I thought, well, what if I just take noisier pictures and drop the gain? So I tried a gain of 0. So as noisy as it can get. Nina told me I should do 44-second exposures. I rounded up to 45 seconds. And I got pretty much what I had gotten in the 15-second exposures at a gain of 100. And instead of taking up 12 gigs of storage, it's 4 gigs, which, still adds up. But, and this is all with I hadn't said it, but it's with my blue filter for this. So with Pleiades. So that was a fun experiment to run through. I learned, taking the optimal settings is not necessarily the right thing based on whatever your goals might be. And to experiment and write down, for me, I write down everything so I can reference it later. Like, what was that thing that actually worked? Apparently it's gain of 0 and 45 seconds. Beyond that, there's always going to be problems, and I'll run through these pretty quick. So this is with the Monochrome camera as well. I was having dew problems early in the morning. I installed every single filter backwards in the filter wheel, if you look at what people normally do for filters, but what do I know? I was having problems with autofocus and Nina triggering. When it triggered, I would get a period of really bad guiding. And also when filter changes happened, I got really bad guiding. For some reason, the guiding was terrible at near declination, 0 degrees. Frames were tilted quite a bit. My image train, I showed a picture earlier with the filter wheel hanging off the side. So somehow in the middle of the night, it was coming loose. The threads holding everything together came loose and it was rotating it, which was not ideal. And then star saturation was a problem for the broadband filters, which we just talked about. So found that this camera has a dew heater built in, so I turned it on. Problem solved. I installed my filter wheel backwards. That should work, I hope. No problem. In Nina, for these 2 guiding issues, fiddled around with my sequencing so that I don't do the triggering automatically anymore, which is not as efficient, but it gets the job done. Found I hadn't balanced stuff well. Like, that's a pretty simple one for me to do, and I completely missed it. It was off by a good amount. I had initially flipped my telescope over so that the focus knob wasn't on the bottom, it was on the top, not in the way of equipment. But I decided to try flipping it back to the right way, which got rid of the tilt almost completely. And I rotated the filter wheel so that gravity would tighten the threads instead of loosen them. And I haven't had a problem with that since. And as we mentioned, I lowered the gain. This caused other problems. Just a quick mention, like my autofocus and dithering was taking a really long time. So I did some observing of the logs, seeing how long things were taking in Nina, and able to cut it down by, I think, 40%. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good, Naveen, or excuse me, Naveen. I have another friend whose name's Naveen, so my apologies. Okay, everybody, so if anybody has any questions, this would be a good time to ask. And Mark Littleton, pretty much described it to a T. I'm pretty jealous of you that you were able to learn this fast. I'm going to go ahead and show my quick presentation after this, seeing how many questions are asked. Yeah, it's pretty admirable that you were able to do this in less than 2 years. It took me more than 10 years to get to the point where you were. So
I think I have a problem. I'm slightly obsessive about things I'm really into. So,
Well, I try to be too, but yeah, that's one of my biggest things. I tend to be way too careful and methodic about things, and well, there's benefits and downsides of that. So, okay, with that said, yeah, getting back to what I was saying, yeah, any questions?
Naveen, I have two comments actually. I had to laugh at the tape on your filter wheel because I had to do exactly the same thing, and because it leaks light.
Yep. There's a couple of screw holes. I learned it's screw holes, and I bought a different off-axis guider so I can actually screw stuff together, like bolt it together. So that's on back order.
But my filter wheel reversed when it first did it, and I had to turn it around again.
They don't give you very good instructions for that, do they?
Exactly right. Yes. So yeah, that just made me laugh because I made both of the same issues. Came up with exactly the same setup, same camera, everything. Yeah. Have you thought about I'm going to add a rotator to my system now because I found rotation has caused me a lot of problems. When I go from one to another, I really need to rotate to fit the thing into the field. And so I'm going to add a rotator in next.
Yeah, my flattener has a rotator, so it's manual. And that's one of my problems with it's not tight. Like I can jiggle stuff and it's maddening. But I think before I do that, I would want to also look at automating, taking flats. I don't know. Because I set up my gear and then I go to bed. Because I've got all sorts of monitoring and metrics and stuff. So.
See, I'm up all night with it, so I don't have to worry about that so much. Because I can watch every frame come in and see when something's going wrong. But
yeah,
when the focus is going or something. But for me, it's just setting up the thing and having to rotate the camera and having it go out of focus, that kind of thing. When you rotate it by hand, if I have a rotator, I won't have to worry about that so much.
Yeah.
But the camera and the filters are remarkable, I think.
Yeah, it makes a little difference.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
You went through, you went for the ASI 533, the color camera, and then you progressed to the monochrome camera. If you had to do it all again, would you just go straight to the monochrome camera, or did you learn valuable stuff by first using the color camera?
I think I would still go with the one-shot color. I learned a ton. Going monochrome complicates things a good bit. Not that you couldn't just do it, go straight to it, especially with this club. There's plenty of people who can give corners, but
depends on how much you want to spend.
That too.
Yeah, well, that's the big thing. It does get expensive for these cameras. So, going through a progression of them does get rather expensive if you can't reasonably sell them or something.
Camera, 7 filters, and the filter wheel just all by themselves, you're talking $5,000.
Right.
Yeah.
So you may want to start with something less than that and get your feet wet before if you can spend less than half of that for a monochrome setup. First thing you'd have to, if you get tired of that and you want to do something better, you're trying to sell it or something. But that's what I did. I had an ATIC and 1.25" filters for years. And then and even that was expensive, but it wasn't as expensive as this current setup. But you end up with limits. So, you probably want to start out with something less than $5,000.
I personally like just trying what I have. So I was, starting off with the phone camera to, I tried 2 DSLRs that my wife had. One was an older Nikon D60. Quickly decided that was terrible to use because it has no live view. Everything had to be done through the viewfinder, which is it's not easy to do any kind of focusing that way. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, Colin, where you are, what gear you might have, but if you haven't tried something you have laying around, then give it a shot.
Well, I am quite a newbie. I started off with I've got a Nikon D7500 camera, an APS-C camera. I bought a William Optics Red Cat, the telescope. Before I got that, I bought an Ioptron Skyguider Pro. So that's basically what I've been working with, and I'm surprised. I'm pretty happy with some of the pictures I've taken so far, but I'm trying to figure out what the next step is. Do I go for the better mount, and get some go-to capabilities? Do I? One area that I have had problems with is occasionally getting my polar alignment. So, it's wondering whether the next step should be like a pole master or something to help with that, or do I go for guiding, or
I mean, I can dive into quick recommendation, like at least the polar alignment. There's software out there that can help you with that. I couldn't name anywhere close to all of it, but I know Nina recently added a plugin for doing a 3-point polar alignment, which works pretty well. And that's open source, free, runs on Windows. So I don't know what you're imaging with, but that might be an option to help with the polar alignment.
My view is the mount is the most important thing.
Yeah, you'll be limited pretty quickly by the mount. But I mean, you have the Red Cat, which is a really nice scope. Actually, if they'd been I think they were like listed as back order, like less available than the Zenith Star 73. But I was seriously considering that telescope.
Yeah, I had to wait a few months for it, but I'm happy, with it.
Good.
Yeah, and one of my constraints is where I live. I have a lot of trees around, and like with my polar alignment, there's a hole in the trees where I can see Polaris. I can't see any stars around Polaris because the tree blocks them all. So I don't even so I kind of realized a pole master wouldn't do me much good because I can't see the other stars that you need to see around it. So
Good. No.
Take a look at Nina, see if that might work for you, because the 3-point alignment can point at any point in the sky. And it takes a picture, plate solves, rotates moves the mount, takes another picture, and then takes a third picture. And then from that, calculates how off you are, and then loops through taking pictures to tell you, how your adjustments are doing with the result. Are you using a PC or like an ASI?
No, PC.
PC, okay. Yeah, take a look at it. I mean, it's free, and if it doesn't work out, you're not out any money. So.
Yeah, okay, good idea. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so they've added a lot of plugins lately. So
Colin, I would echo Steve Christensen's recommendation about looking more so to investing in a mount more so than anything. The reason why I want to bring that up is that if you look at where you are right now, you have the Red Cat, right? If you plan on going any bigger, you need to make sure that you have your foundation in place. Okay, foundation, as in what I'm saying is your mount. So if you plan on going to something heavier than the Red Cat, well, that's already taken care of because you have a mount that can handle a heavier load. So that's something I had to go through. I went through 3 different mounts, and there's some people in the club that have gone through a lot more than 3. So everybody says that. You probably heard this way too many times, is that when it comes to imaging, your mount is most important. And the other thing that everybody stands by is that whatever is the heaviest thing you're going to put on your mount, make sure your mount can handle double that if you're going to image with it. So look at your whatever you want to do into the future. Just try to think long and hard, however heavy you want to go. as far as imaging goes, the heaviest load that you want to put on your mount, and let that dictate what your mount selection should be.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was thinking of the the EQ 6R Pro.
Yeah, EQ6 is very popular around here, whether it be, was it Skywatcher and then Orion. I mean, that's when I first started out as far as equatorial, I had something from an all-in-one package from Mead. It was called the LXD75. And I went with that, and I was able to do, satisfactory results, but I didn't even bother guiding with that thing because I could hear it struggling with just tracking with the actual scope that came with it. And everybody was using, or what I was researching is that the best mount at the time that was affordable, at least for me, was an EQ6R, which is called the Atlas with Orion. And so, yeah, EQ6, I think that's all the mount you're going to need unless you go with something that's very long focal length. But otherwise, yeah, EQ6 is a good choice.
Yeah, okay. I'll second that. I've been very happy with mine.
Me too.
Okay, so I think that's it. And because we're recording right now, we won't stop recording. Is there anybody, we'll get to the section right now where people will present their images. Is there anybody out there who wants to present their images since our last meeting back in October? Anybody have anything?
I can, Chris, if you want me to. You know what I've got. So
yeah, well, yeah, it's always fine. I mean, if you post something that's on the groups, IO or Yahoo, whatever, I highly recommend that for everybody here. If you've already posted it, that's fine. Go ahead and talk about it because it's always good to hear any details you may have left out in the email or whatever you put on groups IO.
I'll put the link up to the album that has my 2600 mm images. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, very good.
If people want to just go and take a look, they can. It's in the chat now. All these were done with the 2600 mm and mostly narrowband filters. And these are all various experiments I've done in the last month or 6 weeks, I suppose, since then. So it gives you an idea. I like the 2600 mm partly because the levels of gray that you have in that 2600 are so many that you're getting much more subtle variations in the gray levels than you do with anything I've had before. And so you get a lot more detail and a lot more subtlety in the pictures to do that. So
Steve, could you remind me, you talk about the number of grays and whatnot. I guess the way I would say is the number of shades. What's the, so I mentioned it in the chat, what dynamic range is. So dynamic range is, well, like you're saying, Steve, is number of shades. So what's the dynamic range of your ASI ZWO or your ZWO ASI 2600? How many is that?
14-bit, I think.
14-bit? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, ideally you want to, or not ideally, but the most expensive cameras have a dynamic range of 16 bits, which I want to say is 65,000 shades.
I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, it's 16-bit. I'm just looking it up. So.
16-bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, practically that's about as good as you can get right now as far as affordability goes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've noticed it's an enormously different from the ATIC that I was using before in terms of just shades and subtleties and in imaging. So, but it does need bigger filters. You have to have at least 36 millimeter filters, and that makes it more expensive. So the old 1.25" filters I had just won't work. Too much vignetting and things like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's always trade-offs. I mean, that's sort of the easy way out I took when I got the ASI 183. It's very noisy, so you have to make sure you got a good set of darks for it. But because the sensor is smaller and, well, like I said earlier before we started the meeting, the actual pixels are way tiny. You can still use 1.25 filters with it. That's one of the biggest reasons why I got that camera, because I already had 1.25 filters for everything, whether it be planetary or narrowband imaging. So, but that's, yeah, as you said, Steve, yeah, if you're going to go with something quite a bit bigger than, what's the term I'm looking for? What's the size of sensors that we have? We have full frame. What's the next one down?
This is APS-C.
APS-C, thank you. Thank you. If you're going to go with APS-C, you want something, you're going to have to, you have no choice but to buy some filters that are bigger than 1.25, whether it be, was it 36 millimeters that Steve got, or all out 50 millimeter 2-inch filters that you could use.
Yeah. And then I set it for the highest dynamic range when I take pictures. And that seems to do what I want to do. But I also have to do very long-term guiding in a lot of the targets that I'm working on. So, you know, get 10 minutes or even 20 minutes of exposure times for each frame, because I'm doing some extremely dim things. And so you need to be able to guide incredibly accurately to get that kind of thing. And that takes a lot of tweaking and fiddling around. And then if you lose one frame for whatever reason, you've lost a lot of time when you do it that way. So,
well, I think that's the consequence of all these exposures that are, you know, multi-minutes. So, okay, we have a question from Aaron Henderson about he wants to share an image of M92. If I remember correctly, that's a globular cluster. So if you're new to Zoom, hopefully this should work. Down at the bottom, there's an icon called Share Screen. And you click on that icon, and a bunch of windows should pop up of all the windows that you have opened on your computer at the time. So, Aaron, if you were to open up an image of that M92 that you want to share with us, then you can select it on that list of screens that you can share. So if you want to do that, you can do that, or you can do just what Steve did just now. You can just copy and paste the address for it on the chat, and we can look at it like that. But yeah, that's the best way. That's why I can explain that to you. So
okay, I'm going to try to share my screen because I don't have it posted anywhere. This is real early days for me, and so your thoughts will not be blown off. Okay.
That's fine. That's totally fine.
But you know, again, like everybody knows, this is a progression. Okay, I'm gonna try to see if it'll share. My security's taken over. Zoom. Yeah. Okay. Let me hold on a second, fella. Yep. Did that come across?
I don't see anything. I don't know if this will help.
It's telling me I have to quit Zoom and come back for the. I can drop out and come right back real quick.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. We can do that.
All right. But I'll come right back.
Okay. All right. That's fine.
This is Dave, and I'd have a quick question for Naveen. Again, just amazing progress in the 2 years. I agree with what everybody was saying. Were there any books you would suggest or recommend that sort of helped with some of the basic principles that you were talking? I feel like it's almost like another language that I'm listening to. Where just sort of start?
I don't, from an image acquisition perspective, I don't have any books. I have a stash of links, like sites on some of the things that I've learned, which I'll take an action. I'll send to the imaging group after this. Mm-hmm. But as far as like books, the only things I've bought are on image processing, specifically PixInsight. So if that's something you're interested in, I can recommend books, but it's probably the same books that everybody else will recommend too. But not that that's a bad thing. But,
right. And also, to Aaron's comment before, thank you so much for sharing some of those very early photos, because it makes me feel a little more comfortable that I'm taking junk right now. And
it's not junk. It's
not junk. They're successes. I liked your expression. So
I mean, as I said, you set out with a goal to do something, and hopefully you're accomplishing it. And if not, you learn something so you can meet that goal next time. So
hey, there are zillions of YouTube videos. Just go to YouTube.
Just go down the rabbit hole.
Start typing in keywords and see what you get, because there are some really good YouTube channels for starting out and more advanced things and stuff like that. The trouble with books is they get out of date so quickly that you get something now, and 6 months from now there's going to be new technology and new software, and I have zillions of books I don't even ever look at because they're out of date. Even the Pixar and Sight books and other books like that are out of date because they keep having new things come in all the time. So Adam Brock, I think, is one guy who has lots of Pix and Sight stuff, but there's maybe 10 or 20 other channels where people talk about these kind of things. And that's probably a place to start before you spend any money on books. Or there are websites, of course, too, but the YouTube channel, just try that.
Okay, Aaron, looks like everybody, I assume everybody's seeing the shared screen right there.
Okay,
here.
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, I recognize the field of view there. So yeah, M92, very nice.
Yeah, this is a pretty wide field too. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share if everybody's seen it.
Well, actually, no, go back to it.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Yeah, this was on my Vixen SX mount with my Canon T7, and I had a 300 millimeter fixed lens on it. It's about it's 300 millimeter. It's a Maxitov lens, and but it has the aperture is only like 56 millimeters, I think, on it. So it's got a fairly wide field here, but it's about, I think it's about 5 degrees, something like that. Anyway, I was running it with my Astroberry, and it's not guided. And you can tell that because there is some distortion on the stars. They're not nice pinpoints. They're kind of oblong. But I think this was 3 or 4 stacked images. Let's see how many it was. I can tell you. Oh wait, yeah. And it only got like one. It only got, really, the software only got like 10 out of 20. So I didn't take a whole bunch, and they are fairly short exposures because again, I have a periodic error on my mount that I'm still dealing with right now. That, again, like everything's a learning process, right? You look at your photos, you try to evaluate what's gone wrong, what's gone right, and replicate the things that went right, and then try to fix the things that went wrong and move a little bit further. And so actually the Astroberry did really well for controlling the camera and controlling the telescope, and slowing, because the Sphinx, it's a Vixen Sphinx. It has Starbook is the hand controller, it was probably really good in the early 2000s, but it's showing its age. But the thing is, it doesn't really matter because the Astroberry is taking care of all the all the go-to capabilities. So which is really, really nice. I mean, actually, it's Sky Safari that's taking care of the go-to, but yeah, it's again, it's work in progress. This was just right outside my window, so I was connected via Wi-Fi to the. I've got a Raspberry Pi 400, which is basically the keyboard model, and that has really good reception because it's not encased in a metal case, and so the wireless is really good on that. And so again, this was just a test setup. I wanted to test what I could push with the current equipment that I have. I have an ASI 120 MC on the way, MCS, I think. Should be here in a few days, and we'll see what that can do. So that's really all I have on that. Anybody got any questions?
Mentioned in the chat limitations on polar alignment. Is that like talking through that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's a mechanism in Astroberry. I haven't used it yet because for one thing, I don't think you actually it would help to have a view of Polaris. It was just behind the trees when I had this previous setup because I was trying to optimize for a lot of deep sky stuff, and so I wanted to move it a little bit to the right, and it got shadowed by some trees. Polaris did, but Astroberry does have a polar alignment capability. So very interested in doing that and seeing how that works. So yeah, it's and I do have the fine adjustments on my mount to be able to adjust it. And I'll probably try to use the DSLR as my guide scope. I don't know. Does that sound crazy?
I would say it technically can be done. I did it.
Whether the software supports your camera to take images.
Yeah, there's actually there is a driver you can get for DSLRs that will have it show up as an ASCOM device. I don't know what the Astroberry is looking for.
Yeah, it has all those protocols on there. I mean, it saw the DSLR fine as the primary camera. It should recognize it as a guide camera. You should be able to tell it.
So I mentioned in the presentation from my specific camera, downloading the images was really slow. But that being said, like, try it. I'd love to hear how it goes. Like, I didn't actually guide with it. That would be a really neat experiment.
Yeah, I was thinking because with the ASI camera as the primary, as the image taking camera, I could swap them around too. So I'm going to try it both ways and see which one works.
120 will work as a guide camera. I've done it.
The what?
So 120. You say you're getting an ASI 120.
Yeah.
That will be a guide camera. It's what I used to use.
Okay. Yeah, and see, I can connect the DSLR up to I've got a Celestron C130 Maxitoff, and it's basically a 5-inch Maxitoff, and see how that works too. So I've got a lot of different things to play around with. Mainly, I'm not going to do a lot of color stuff because this thing it's a non-modified DSLR. But the other camera, the ASI, might be able to do a little bit of color stuff. I'm not looking for Hubble quality here, not anytime soon. My expectations are pretty low, but if I can get some pretty decent images, I'll be really, really happy. Actually, I'm really happy with this image here. You're seeing something that's really dim, and it's a huge field, and I haven't had that capability before, so it's a win.
Okay, very good. Does anybody else have anything they would like to show?
Well, I'll show you my picture, and you can make some comments on it.
Go for it.
All right. I'm not sure. Oh, 2. Okay, there we go. Is anything coming up? Oh, hold on. Ah, damn it. It's I'm trying to show this from my Mac, and my Mac is complaining I have to give it permissions to.
That's what I had to
show
do.
My, yeah.
So is the solution to join back in? Like Aaron did?
Well, I set the security settings on it to allow it to access the file system, and then it was able to do it once I restarted the app.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to make me do. It's going to make me leave and come back. So I'll join in a second.
Okay, very good. Anybody else have anything to show? No? Okay, well, I brought this up really quick. I guess I'll blow through it really quick. Let's see. Okay, so pretty much everybody, you're just going to have to read the what I have written here. So this is my first after image, a blurry image of Saturn. It was just me holding up the camera to the eyepiece. Then I made, then I took 995. Here, hold on one second, sorry. Let's see. Oh, come on. Okay, so getting back to what I was saying, so yeah, I made I used a Nikon 995, which if people remember back in the olden days, if anybody paid attention to that kind of tech, that was kind of cutting edge for that time. It was one of the first digital cameras that had a view screen, and it was only 3.3 megapixels. And here's what Saturn looked like once I built an adapter for it. And when I say built, as in I didn't have a 3D printer like Naveen. I just made things out of air conditioner, or not air conditioner, but electrical wire conduit, PVC, and some duct tape, lots of duct tape. So anyway, you can see a little bit of detail somewhat there, but yeah, it's a massive improvement from that guy, right? So next, this is sort of where Naveen started off. This was back in 2008. Got moved on to a different telescope at the time that had an equatorial mount. That was the Schmidt-Newtonian. There's Nikon 995 again. And since I had tracking, I was able to get a somewhat better image of different objects. And so I went for Orion Nebula, because like we've all talked about, it's one of the easiest deep sky objects to take an image of. And but again, this was afocal. So that's what it looked like in all of its glory, using a Nikon 995 and the Schmidt-Newtonian. And so I went from there. I was kind of like, oh my God, what else can we do? How much more money can I lose? So I went on to a 350D DSLR, significant step up as far as resolution goes. You know, making a note there that all this is in color, and you'll see why later. But anyway, Schmidt-Newtonian, I used that again, 800 millimeter focal length there. So yeah, when I moved on to doing long exposure, this is what I was able to get with just with a DSLR camera. So DSLR cameras, they still have their uses these days, but the standalone CMOS cameras that you would get from DWO are pretty much supplanting these as far as when it comes to astrophotography. But DSLR still have their place, in my opinion. So there you go, DSLR plus 800 millimeter Schmidt-Newtonian. So, I got another DSLR after that because, well, it was double the resolution, and I had it modified so that it would pick up the hydrogen alpha wavelength that a lot of these nebulae give off. So most DSLRs, they have a infrared filter in the front of it, and they block out the hydrogen alpha that a lot of these nebulae give off. So got it modified. Then I combined it to Ritchie Creighton 8-inch by Astrotech, which is a huge focal length, of 1600 millimeters. And I wanted to see what I could get, and it turned out okay. So there again, there's M42, so quite a bit step up from the afocal days, and you know, from when I had that. But anyway, so there we go. And then I moved on to, well, actually, that's the wrong image right there. I moved on to CMOS imaging, and got a color image, but this time I was using an APO refractor, okay? For the color image, I did use a DSLR, and again, it's the same DSLR I had used to make this guy right here. It was modified so that you could pick up the hydrogen alpha wavelength, and this is the color image I was able to get with that APO refractor and this DSLR. So I took that color image and went on to CMOS, similar to how Naveen and Steve Christensen did. They went on to CMOS with the 2600. This is one I was mentioning before we started recording as the ASI 183. And because it's mono, like we talked about or like Naveen talked about at the end of his presentation, you can filter it for any wavelength that you want. So in this case, I filtered it for hydrogen alpha. So everything that you're about to see is hydrogen alpha. So using the same telescope, but ASI 183 millimeter, oh, not millimeter, mm, which means mono. I don't know what exactly the two M's mean, but ASI 183 mono camera, filtered out everything, got hydrogen alpha wavelength only. If you can see hydrogen alpha, basically this image would be red because it's 656 nanometers as far as the wavelength goes. And I used the refractor that I used for the color image that you see here. Now you take that image and you combine them together. I won't really go into too much details, and you get something like that. So bam, it really starts to take things to the next level. So there you go. This is my presentation, just in case things got cut shorter than I would like, but I breezed through it. So went from CMOS, bringing out the H alpha camera, went back to my color image, which was that, combined with the H alpha with the CMOS camera, adding the two camera the data sets from the two cameras, and that's what you get. So my work in progress right now is a 200 millimeter lens, and I did this actually back in late 2019, where everything went south as far as meeting up with each other. And I had just gotten the ASI 183 for that, so I'm doing a wide field image of all of the Orion constellation, with the most prominent objects being the what do you call it, M42, the Orion Nebula, and the Forsake Nebula. That's upside down right there. So anyway, questions? No, you don't have any questions. That's all I'm going to show you. And let's get back to what Colin was going to show us. Go for it, Colin.
Well, we'll give it one more try here. See if this works this time.
Okay, very good. We can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so this is, I started trying to take the brain fog here. The Andromeda Nebula just before the challenge was announced. So these were taken just before that. As you can see, that I've got a reddish band across the bottom. I've got a white band across the top, and then sort of a yellowish coloration up in the corner. I was pretty happy with the way the stars turned out. Reasonably crisp and whatever. I think the yellowish in the upper right hand corner is from the fact that I'm taking these from my driveway, and nearby there's a street light, and it's it's one of the old type of street lights, so I'm not sure if it's mercury vapor or sodium, but it's one of those. It's got a very yellowish tinge to it. So I think that's where that's coming from. I'm not entirely sure where that what's happening at the bottom there with the red band, other than possibly I live very close to some very high radio towers that have flashing red lights on top. So it may be something that's coming in from those. But anyway, that's the image so far. I did try to do, I'm using, I'm challenged right now with trying to learn PixInsight. So this is as far as I've gotten so far. Although, well, I did get a little bit further. I did do a dynamic background extraction, which did get rid of most of the color, but it left it with a very greenish hue. So now I have to figure out how to do color balancing on it. Anyway, that's my photograph so far.
Well, Colin, you need to use some flats as well if you can, because the spots you're getting are from dust spots.
Yeah, I did have quite a few flats actually, but not from that evening. So it must be something that crept in between when I took the flats and when I took the actual lights.
And there are mechanisms in PixInsight for getting rid of the green depending on how you stretch it, for one. There are at least two different, there's one signal, a noise reduction thing that will get rid of the green. And there's another way, just when you stretch it, if you hit the right buttons, the green will go away. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there is. It's like I said, I'm just a little bit challenged. There are just so many options in PixInsight, figuring which is the right one and in which order to apply them is where I'm challenged. So I've been, doing my best to find some good videos on the internet to tell me how to do it. One of the issues I have is that I find some videos, but then they turn out to be old and they apply to an old version that doesn't seem to quite match with what I've got. And
Colin, have you watched there's a video, I think his name is Astro Dude. It's a long series. It's about a 12-part series where he processes Andromeda in PixInsight. And it's a couple of years old, but it goes through in a whole lot of granular detail. And I found it very helpful when I was first starting to use PixInsight, just to get an overview of all the tools and how to use them. And he does it with Andromeda, and so you could use your data and just follow him along in that series. I'll find a link and I'll put it in chat.
I think I may have found it. I found it just yesterday. Well, I found a series of 12.
Yeah, it's probably him.
Yeah, and I just haven't gotten through it yet. With work and what have you, I just haven't had time to look at it yet. But that was my next strategy.
It's probably still applicable, other than maybe the pre-processing, the weighted batch pre-processing script has evolved a lot.
And I did see an email that had a pointer to a discussion about the weighted batch pre-processing, and I did look at that, and I did get some information that was useful from that. So
there's a really good set of older tutorials. Is it Light Vortex? I think they're from like 2015. If you want to know how to do stuff the manual way, that might be a good route to go. It's all text though.
Okay, I wouldn't mind having the link to that.
Yeah, let me grab that. And it's organized. There's a section of tutorials. It's got a bunch of different things, creating masks to the pre-processing to all sorts of stuff. I spent a lot of time on this, starting out with PixInsight. There's a steep learning curve, so just be prepared to change everything. That's exactly what I've been finding.
It looks like an excellent tool.
Yeah,
and I'm certainly finding it. I was getting a little frustrated with the Deep Sky Stacker and Adobe Photoshop. It just seemed a bit too random to me. Try this, try that sort of thing. PixInsight, seems to have more targeted functionality that appeals to me a bit more. So I'm just using the the evaluation version right now, but so far I like it. I'm just challenged with trying to understand all the tools and when to use. And sometimes there's multiple tools that do the same thing, and when do you use which one? And have some of them evolved over time so that some of them are old or deprecated. They just haven't been removed. But,
yeah. And Steve put Adam Block's YouTube channel in there. He's, I mentioned with weighted batch pre-processing. If you haven't looked into it, he's got a series of videos that are really good that also get into the why you want to take the calibration frames and what they're doing behind for your images that recommend watching if you have the time.
Has anyone purchased his channel? I'm tempted to purchase Adam Block's channel because his videos are so good.
I have not yet purchased any training from anybody.
He's got like more in depth. He goes into more depth on his own channel. And so I keep toying with the idea of purchasing it.
Yeah, I'm toying with the idea too, so I can understand. Everything he puts out, it's always worthwhile to watch.
Yeah.
So I have to speed it up a little bit. He talks a little slow.
YouTube's good, has nice features to speed that along.
I think YouTube allows you to speed up videos, does it not?
It does.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and do it.
Did y'all mention Nico Carver too?
I don't think he's come up with it. Yeah, I would if
he's very good.
Yeah, actually, I saw a couple of his, and that's what helped me really get started with the PixInsight to understand some of the basic functionality in it.
Yeah, I cut my teeth on processing in GIMP and used some of the videos that he had on processing Orion GIMP, which was good. I'm not paying the Photoshop tax.
My imaging rig looks just like Nico Carver's because I was watching his videos a couple of years ago and I was putting mine together.
Okay, Jim, did you, I saw your link there. Did you want to quickly talk about your image there, the Milky Way?
Yeah, it's here behind me, so I didn't have to share it or anything. We went out west last month. It was in early October. We were out at Grand Canyon. It was mostly cloudy at Grand Canyon, so other than a cool picture of a thunderstorm, I didn't really get any night sky photos at Grand Canyon. But out in Zion, we got some clear skies. And so we headed out to the park one night, and I asked one of the rangers where to go. And she said, well, the place I usually recommend, they're doing a search and rescue, so that's off limits right now. So I had to kind of go find my own way, and I ran into somebody, and he saw my sky guider. And so he came up to me and started chatting and said, here's where you go, walk down this trail. There's a bridge down there, set up on that bridge. And it was a perfect location. Just to kind of get the Watchman Mountain in the background with the Milky Way rising. It was October, so it didn't have a lot of time. Milky Way was setting, so I didn't have a whole lot of time, but fired off some images and love those dark skies out there. Just can't beat them.
That's a cool picture.
Okay, anybody else? No? Okay.